Okay, we are live for episode 230 of Trek Live. How you doing this morning, Dan?
Doing good. Excited and a little nervous. It's for this kind of topic. I do like to do a little bit of prep, some mental notes and stuff. But with this, it's kind of the unknown, I guess. So I'm excited for it.
Yeah, this is always a challenge. We've done this. I think I went back and looked, and this might be our fifth time trying this. We'll periodically come back to this. Uh, we're gonna do no prep, which is using the Memory Alpha random article generator, which is kind of hidden now and isn't called the same thing as it was back in the day, but they still have it to some extent. And I'll show you how we do that to kind of find us a topic, and we'll click that button, and whatever comes up, we'll pretty much try to make work. It could be anything from an episode that'll be really self-explanatory. We'll talk about that episode as best we can. Um, it could be like a really obscure reference that we'll have to like look at the article and see what episode it's referencing or what storyline it's referencing, what character it's referencing. And we'll just kind of use whatever it gives us as our launching pad and find a topic through whatever we get. Um, and if we have to roll twice, we'll roll twice. If we get something completely off the radar that we can't make anything work from, we'll do it again. But we're gonna give this a shot for the first time in a while. I don't think we've done this in the last year and a half at least. So yeah, that's
Yeah, should be fun.
that's the plan for today. At least the bulk of the middle of today. But before we get into that, I think we should touch on our rewatches. I know you've been, this time of year is really crazy where you are. You get, you're jammed in your personal life and your work life. But I know you watched at least one TNG episode that you tweeted about the other day. Tell us about where you are and what episode that was and anything else you might have watched in the meantime.
Yeah, I think so. I have been watching A Strange New Worlds, obviously, and I think
Yeah,
we'll touch on that, after
yeah,
the
we'll
main
hit that.
topic today. But I think last time, I don't know if I talked about it, but I did watch Descent, so that's
Hmm.
part one and two. So I'm into season seven, and so I watched the second episode, Liaisons. It's an interesting one.
Yeah,
It kind of some of these season seven episodes, from what I remember, are sometimes hit and miss. This one is interesting to me because it it feels really early TNG,
yeah,
even like TOS, and so it's some of the stuff is really campy and on the nose, but I really like that they take uh some inspiration from like some cinema stuff and some obviously some literary stuff with some Stephen King stuff, but um no, it's just interesting that that this late in the Next Generation, it's just interesting that it feels like this could be almost right at home in the first season. Like,
hmm,
in my mind, it's like, well, in the writers' room, we've got this script that we never really touched from 7 years ago. Maybe we had this idea one time. I just find it interesting.
yeah. I love that you watched it and kind of threw a little spotlight on it on Twitter. Because it's an episode that doesn't get a lot of love. People don't talk about it much. It's a little thin, and it's certainly you know middle of the pack at best. I think if you would kind of poll the general fandom out there, but I think the things you touched on really give it some juice. I think looking at it through the lens of maybe a little bit of a throwback with some of the Picard vibes on the planet with the
Yeah,
with the
which
uh-huh,
Yeah, which was Misery. I don't think I
misery.
mentioned it when I
Yeah,
just, yeah, which is the 1990,
yeah.
91,
Kathy
somewhere in there.
Bates, James Conrad.
Um, yeah, a movie, based off a book that,
Hmm.
yeah, that's just kind of similar themes.
Yeah, and I had never thought of that. I had never, connected those two things. I've seen Misery. I'm very familiar with it. It's a really good movie, and I've seen Liaisons many, many times since I was a kid, and I never made that connection. But you're absolutely right. I think the relationship between Picard and that fictitious female character in disguise is very akin to what you see James Caan and Kathy Bates doing in Misery. And, you know, I definitely think there's certainly some TOS feeling, kind of campy, like you said, vibes with the way some of that plays out. I think the stuff on the ship with Worf and his ambassador kind of partner is, you know, very light. It's kind of there are some day in the life kinds of vibes going on here where, you know, there's not a lot of urgent crisis going on. It's very kind of, you know, run of the mill diplomatic kind of mission. You know, nothing greatly important happening, but it's kind of nice to just kind of hang out with the characters a little bit on the ship and talk about things that aren't so urgent or, you know, pressing. So you know, I think it's certainly not one of their best, and I agree with you that there are vibes that even go back to, like you said, TNG season 1, tonally, but there are things to like in there. I don't think it's a complete miss. I think it's maybe a little more middle of the pack than great or, you know, bad. I think it's kind of more in the mushy middle there, but yeah. Interesting episode for sure. For me, I'm rocking and rolling a little bit. I'm about halfway through Deep Space Nine season 3. I started Voyager season 1. I'm a handful of episodes into that. Really enjoying both. DS9 kind of finding its footing more and more going into season 3. It's not quite bald head and goatee yet. But it's a little closer to.
It's getting there.
It's getting there. Yeah, I think the serialized emotional stuff is really starting to take hold a bit. You know, just in the last handful of episodes I watched, there's a lot of focus on the Kira and Odo stuff building, the changeling mythologies starting to kind of come together. I just watched the last episode I watched was Destiny, which I think is a really good emissary. Cisco kind of episode that is kind of uniquely situated to work in Deep Space Nine, thematically, and, you know, given the kind of character Cisco is and the kinds of dilemmas that he finds himself in. So I'm really enjoying Deep Space Nine, loving being back in Voyager. I think the first handful of episodes of Voyager are actually really solid. I think Caretaker, Parallax, Phage. My next one up is Eye of the Needle. I can't wait to watch that. I think there's a lot of good stuff right out of the gate in Voyager. I think in those first handful of episodes, they really do a good job of leaning into we're out here in the middle of nowhere and far, far away, and the Maquis stuff is still very much at play. You know, it's not even just the Starfleet and Maquis crew. It's Neelix too. Like you have Neelix and Kess, who are complete, you know, wild cards and are in neither one. Don't come from anywhere near our world. And I think Neelix in those early episodes is really, you know, alien and kind of jagged edged a little bit. And I wish they would have stuck with that a little more than they do. But yeah, really enjoying that alternating. A lot of good episodes. I'm going to be interested. I'm already kind of racking up. I'm looking at both seasons kind of running parallel, and a lot of B's. And I'm thinking there's going to be a lot of B's at the end of the season.
For both season 3 of Deep Space Nine and Voyager.
Yeah. So I'm going to be curious to, like, maybe throw up on Twitter and maybe in our Discord server, like, this is the batch of episodes that I kind of view all in a single pot, and see what people think as far as, like, what the best and maybe weakest of that bunch is. So yeah, things are chugging along, and we'll keep tabs on that as we move forward. You're coming up on the end of the TNG, and I'm kind of getting into the mushy middle of Deep Space Nine and kicking off Voyager. So a lot of Star Trek that should come out of these rewatches, as far as topic ideas and things to chew on, as we're kind of touching on all kinds of Star Trek in the next few weeks and months.
Because we didn't even touch on the TNG movies as well, so that's another thing that we'll probably hit as well.
I'm very eager to do. I just watched. I do the TNG movies as part of this, like alternating. So I watched Generations last weekend, and I'm really, we haven't really talked about the TNG movies much here on Trek Live. So little bits here and there, like independently. We've talked about Nemesis like years ago. We did a topic that touched on that. I think we've touched on Insurrection, but very like sporadic, and not like having freshly watched them with TNG, kind of in context too. So, and now even with Picard season 3, kind of being the bookend that follows that.
It changes. Yeah,
there are things that happen in those movies that get paid off big time in Picard season 3. So we will definitely be touching on them as you hit them for sure, and definitely looking forward to talking about Generation specifically, actually. All right, so I think before we get into real quick, Jeff's in the chat. Welcome, Jeff. Talking about phage is a cool and disturbing idea. We talked about it before, but it's worthwhile considering if humans were just like the Vidians, if something horrible happened to our species, how would we act any differently? Absolutely, I think that's the beauty of phage and the Vidians as a whole. I think that episode and some of the stuff we see a little further down the line in those first couple seasons of Voyager when the Vidians come into play, I think they do a really good job of establishing that they're, an advanced society that once was, they weren't always like this. This is a byproduct of this ailment that they're dealing with, and it's desperate times calling for desperate measures, and their morality is certainly grayed by their circumstances, and they're doing some horrible, ugly things, but it's being driven by this horrible situation they find themselves in with the phage. So I agree. I mentioned I got into a conversation with somebody on Twitter about phage, just kind of very briefly, and somebody, I think it was Melanie, pointed out the scene in the transporter room when Janeway's talking to the Vidians, being like a really great early moment for Janeway, where you kind of get a taste of her, best assets and her style of command and her kind of moral compass and how she deals with kind of a no-win scenario. So I agree. Phage is really good stuff. But I think we should get into our topic. We don't know what our topic is yet. So what I'm going to do here is switch to a screen where you're not going to see us. You're just going to see the Memory Alpha page. We're going to roll for a random article. It's really called the Random Photo Generator now. It used to be Random Article Generator. So I'm not totally sure how it works. Is it just looking for articles that have a photo associated, or is it just relabeled and it's still the same function? But either way, it basically does the same thing for us in this kind of situation. We click it, it's going to give us, a completely random thing. It could be, like I said earlier, something as specific as an episode or a series, a character, or it could be something really obscure, an object, a prop, a piece of music. It really could be
wide range of everything.
Anything. And we're going to do our best to try to spin a topic off of whatever we get. So we'll see what happens here. And for those who are following along at home, maybe have never done this before, if you're ever looking for, I want to find something random to watch, or, just try this for any reason, really. You're going to just go to the main page on Memory Alpha, scroll down a bit. There's this picture of the day little feature here on the right. And at the bottom in the middle here is a random image. And that's going to take us to, just a random article, really.
But back in the day with Trek After Dark, this is how we would try to decide what episode we watched. So we would, roll 3 or 4 times just to see all right, whichever episode gets mentioned first. That's kind of what. So yeah, that was always fun. The early days of Trek After Dark, just seeing all the random articles would come up and then try to scour and find the first episode that kind of showed up. It was always fun.
Definitely. It's a really cool function for something like that if you're hanging out with friends or you're just looking for something random to watch yourself. It's a really cool way to do that. And we're going to do it now and see what it gives us. And clicking it, and it's taken us to a animated series episode, which is your favorite topic, Dan. You'd love to talk about the animated series. What do we do? Should we try to talk about the animated series as a whole? Should we re-roll? Because We struggle with
I
this.
would say reroll, but
We'll
that's
re-roll.
just me.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
super fresh for you. I don't have a ton. I mean, I'm not completely 110% negative on it. I have some positive things to say about the animated series, but I'll run out fairly quickly, and we don't want to do that. I don't want to harp
Yeah.
on
It's like a
negativity. And
5 minute conversation.
yeah, yeah. So we'll kind of do what we did with episodes back in the day on Trek After Dark. Like you said, sometimes we'd roll 3 times, and it would give us 3 options to toy with and decide from. So we're going to kind of do that here. Click it again, and we got Star Trek 3: The Search for Spock. Is that something that you think we could?
Yeah, we could talk about it because I don't know. It for me it kind of ties into um, maybe a bigger conversation with some of the stuff that we've seen in Strange New Worlds. Actually, I think that this um, Search for Spock, I think, is an interesting kind of interesting and not often talked about because I feel like it comes off, one of the greatest episodes or movies, maybe in Star Trek history, um, and so maybe that people don't buy the stealing of the Enterprise or some of the stuff on the planet that can get a little bit, but it really is like a part two of the
Rathcon?
second, yeah, Wrath of Khan. So
Mhm.
I don't know. I have a hard time, at least for me, just separating the two as one because it's such a part two of that story. Um, but yeah, I feel like, am I wrong, Bill? Is it not often talked about as
I think it kind of gets
a,
lost in the shuffle a little
yeah,
bit, being in between
yeah,
the Wrath of Khan and the Voyage Home, which I think kind of get propped up often as the either or choice for a lot of people, as certainly the best of the TOS movies. There's a lot of Undiscovered Country fans out there. We have friends who would pick Undiscovered Country of those 6 movies for sure. But I think if you like, we ran a poll and said which your favorite movie of these 6, 2 and 4 would be the 2 that would come in the heaviest, and 3 kind of sits kind of tucked away in the middle there, and maybe gets lost in the shuffle a little bit. Jeff in the chat just said there are a lot of in-universe firsts in the search for Spock. Absolutely, I've long kind of said, and I think we've talked about it on this channel before, that the search for Spock really establishes a lot of the canon stuff in Star Trek. I mean, it's the first time we see the Klingon bird of prey. It's the first time we see Space Dock. It's the first time we see, you know, the Klingons in their basic, current versions,
yeah, yeah,
post
yeah.
TOS versions in real, extended ways. We see them in the motion picture briefly on the bridge of that ship at the very beginning of the movie, but in the search for Spock, we get Christopher Lloyd as Krug, and he has a crew, and like there are various Klingon characters who are really involved in the story, and I think that kind of serves as the kind of formal launching off pad for Worf and the Klingons that we get in the Next Generation and beyond. The Grissom, that Oberth class ship, is established in the Search for Spock. That freighter at the beginning of the movie that Valkyris is on, that Krug destroys. That ship, that model, is in the Next Generation like 50 times. That's like the stand-in for the random, alien ship a lot of the time. Even in Deep Space Nine, I think I just saw it in the Maquis. It's a ship in that. So that they get a lot of mileage out of a lot of the stuff that they use in the Search for Spock. So it's a really seminal, like, important piece of Star Trek's history, for no doubt about it.
Yeah, and like the first half of the movie, they aren't really like the typical like on the bridge type of in their
Yeah,
uniforms, and so yeah, it's not your typical start to a quote unquote episode of Star Trek. So
mm-hmm. It's also
yeah, a
pretty
lot of good
grim,
stuff.
like especially in the first half. Like they're miserable. Like they're dealing with the death of Spock, and they're kind of in mourning, and the ship is going to be decommissioned, and there's definitely like a mellow, melancholy tone to the whole movie, really. But especially, like you said, in that first kind of half, when they go to Space Dock and they're kind of being shut down at every turn, and Uh, yeah, it's a very different tonally from really anything that we've gotten before, but very in keeping. I think the characters are true to themselves. Like they're very undeniably, it's Kirk and it's McCoy, Scotty. Like they're their best selves and like extensions of the characters that we got to know in TOS. So
Yeah, and as far as like the storyline goes, I think that it's you mentioned the characters. I think it would be on brand for this crew to be able to just throw caution to the wind
yeah,
and throw their careers kind of out the window just for
mm-hmm.
Spock.
Yeah,
I think that to me that feels right at home with these characters.
it does. Yeah, I think it also just kind of like just having watched Destiny, the Deep Space Nine episode, where Cisco's kind of presented with this like Bajoran prophecy that he knows enough about the wormhole aliens to know that there might be some truth to it, and but it's not in his wheelhouse to believe that. Kirk's kind of got the same situation here. He's being told this stuff about what the Vulcans can do and what's involved in Vulcan mysticism, and as he says, it's he's got to take a leap of faith, kind of like Cisco does in a lot of Deep Space Nine, to kind of go along for this ride and believe that it's worth taking this risk, to go back to the Genesis planet and look for this, Katra, and hope that maybe it'll work. It's not a given that it's gonna go. It's not something that Kirk, knows is true. It's not something he believes 100% is a given. I mean, he's kind of going on instinct and is willing to gamble on it. So, yeah.
I also really love McCoy in this. I think it's perfect that they they chose to do have McCoy carry the Katra, because I think that just adds to the banter between them too. I really like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having them literally like at odds in one mind is definitely a really cool extension of what we saw throughout the series and the first couple of movies. I think it was a really good choice, and it does give D. Kelly like some really cool opportunities to stretch a little bit and not play the same notes. I mean, he's his curmudgeon-y, bone self, but he's got some new layers to play, and I think it is some of D. Kelly's best stuff in the movies. I think he's got some really great stuff in Star Trek V. He's got some really good stuff in Star Trek VI, with Kirk on Aurora Penthe. He's got the great scene in Star Trek II in Kirk's apartment at the beginning of the movie, kind of dressing him down and telling him the truth in the way that only a friend can. But I think in 3 he in large part, I think because Nimoy's not there and they can't kind of lean on Spock as like a on-screen presence as Kirk's foil and somebody to be in scenes with Kirk all the time. McCoy really gets to step up and be the kind of prominent second fiddle in that movie. It's you mentioned that there are some things in Strange New Worlds season 2 that maybe harken back to Strange New Worlds, or harken back to the search for Spock. Certainly in the pilot, not in the pilot, in the premiere, the Broken Circle.
Yeah.
Is that where you're kind of heading with that? Is that what kind of got you thinking?
Yeah, it's just like it's there. I see similarities when like for whatever reason, and I'm sure we have the aspects of this like this in our lives and things, but it's like if you spend like this amount of time with somebody as a crew, I think there's just this element of like wanting to help them, like no matter what. Like it, even if it like Kirk pretty much throws his career out the window, kind of. I love the scene in the cafeteria where he's like asking the admiral if he could go and check this out and take the ship and do all these things, and he's pretty much just turns him down, and it's like you can see on Kirk's face like he's gonna
do it anyway.
He's gonna do it anyway. No, but I just think that I just see similarities, not just between Strange New Worlds, but just I think just these crews in general in Star Trek that we see, like you have this relationship that you form over 7 years or however long you guys serve together. It's just I like that that we keep that kind of theme like throughout the years of Star Trek. Like
100%. Yeah.
I forget when Search for Spock came out, but it's we're still seeing similar themes like this in brand new Star Trek, and so I really appreciate that. It's even in Search for Spock. Like I think there is an episode of TOS that's similar where um, Spock's got to get to Vulcan really quickly, and pretty much similar thing. Like Kirk goes to ask if he could do it mock time, and they just diverts, and it's such a really big diversion. And so I think there's, from the very beginning, there's this relationship, first officer, and not just first officer, just this bridge crew just has for each other.
Yeah. 100%. I think that found family theme is really prominent all the way through. Even Strange New Worlds. Obviously, I think, like you said, we saw that in the Broken Circle. I think La'an sending that distress call was enough for Spock and the rest of the crew to kind of throw caution to the wind, and they were not going to let her just be left hung out to dry under any circumstance. They were going to go whether they were allowed or not. I think back to Picard season 3. Seven talking to Jack Crusher about Voyager being her family, and kind of searching for that still all these years later. Like kind of that's the thing that she's missed all these years, and is kind of hoping she'll find again. And then certainly the TNG crew kind of coming together to work together again is in keeping with that. The Discovery crew taking the leap of faith that they do. All these shows today kind of all kind of contain. I've really believed this since before these shows existed, the new ones, that the kind of common theme, other than Starfleet and serving on a ship and the on-screen specifics of Star Trek, it's that it's when you put people together that are good and upstanding, caring, empathetic people, that this is what's going to happen. You're going to get this found family effect that is going to take hold. And I think all the shows definitely share that and explore that in their own ways, from TOS all the way through to today. And I think The Search for Spock is maybe, like you said, Amok Time's a great example. TOS as a series does this on occasion itself, just the show. But this might be the best example of this cast, this crew, kind of driving home that theme, because they are so willing to collectively throw it all on the line for a chance, not even a guarantee, to save Spock. I think that's what maybe sets that standard that continues on through the next generation and beyond.
Yeah, and I also think that just out, I don't know, at this point, like in Starfleet, I think they go to a more safe, reserved kind of level, and I think it's interesting that I think that Kirk and crew are still like a product of the time where it's like they're gonna throw caution to the wind. This is the wild, wild west. We're not going to really listen to bureaucratic red tape and all that, and just act instead of trying to jump through the hoops of command and all that stuff. So I like that they stay true to that, kind of not just throughout Search for Spock, but through the rest of the movies.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned something when we were offline a couple days ago talking about the latest Strange New Worlds, which we'll get to before we wrap up today. That they really drive home in this latest episode this feeling of being out deep into the frontier and not having backup, and you're kind of out doing your thing. And I think that vibe that you get so heavily in the original series all the way through, I think helps sell that these guys would do this. Like they're out. This is
for sure.
Starfleet isn't like hanging over their shoulder all the time, the way that maybe it feels like in the Next Generation and even Deep Space Nine to some extent, where the fleet and the organization is kind of so well established and deep into space that the oversight and the kind of big brother aspect of the Federation is more prominent. Where in TOS and And prior Strange New Worlds now, early Discovery, it feels like when you're out there, and your crew is kind of all you have until you go home. So that being out and doing these 5-year missions, with these people, it makes it an easy leap to make. I think to take a risk for one of your friends, even when the organization says not to.
Yeah. Even in Stranger Worlds, they do that, and so it's just, I think it's just a product of like you said, it's just a product of what these kind of crews go with.
Yeah,
and they even, again, they keep coming back to this. They touched on it in the trial episode. They grilled April about all these instances. It's like, yeah, well, that's what this era is about as far as command. Like, you got to make these decisions that can,
yourself. Yeah.
So yeah, I just think that still is a product of the time, because I think just watching Search for Spock, it's like, okay, it's this Starfleet is feeling more new and more like the I think the Starfleet we kind of know in this really 90s era, really corporate futuristic type of organization, whereas like, this crew is kind of old school and a throwback to where, like, again, it wasn't just a phone call away. It was, well, we got to make this decision for ourselves, and so yeah, I like that.
Mm-hmm. We have Rob also in the chat, saying hello. He says
Welcome, Rob.
He hopes your little one is doing well and your other half too.
Yep. She's walking now, so yeah, she's
coming along.
Yep.
Jeff is asking us if we have any thoughts on the destruction of the Enterprise.
Ooh,
by the
good
time
question. Good question.
He watched it. He was already familiar with future Enterprises, wondering how that scene was to older fans at the time, like how it played in 1984 when the movie came out, and you didn't know that there was going to be an Enterprise A and a D in just a few years. Well, I'm younger than you, Jeff, I think, and Dan's younger than me, so neither one of us was around in '84 to speak firsthand about this. But I would imagine that it was impactful to most.
But people. Is that another first though? Is that another first destruction of a hero ship?
Of a hero ship, for sure. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, the only hero ship that we really had up to this point was the Enterprise. So we certainly saw Starfleet ships go down in the Doomsday Machine and Wrath of Khan with the Lion.
Yeah.
Like, we saw that, but seeing the Enterprise go is certainly a first. I think it's thematically, necessary. I think that's. I know some people maybe find it to be a little contrived. I don't. I mean, I think they stole the ship and don't have a full complement of people, and it's not fully operational. It's being decommissioned, and they take it, and they get into a combat situation, and have limited resources to deal with that. It's already damaged from the Wrath of Khan stuff to begin with, and it's not being maintained, and certainly not fully crewed. But on top of that, I mean, even beyond like all the on-screen canon kind of stuff that you have to accept, I think thematically it's in keeping with all the things that have to be sacrificed to get this done. This doesn't come easy. This chance to save Spock has a cost. Kirk loses his son. He loses his ship. And we know from the original series how much that ship means to him. That's his whole identity. He's sacrificed a lot in his personal life, and his desires and wants and needs to be the captain of the Enterprise, and doesn't feel like a lot of these other things are compatible with that. That is his identity, and his crew is his family. So, I think that's where a lot of the impact comes from for me, knowing what it means to Kirk to lose that ship.
Yeah, and I think you see like how like out of like just not well Kirk is with his with command. He's got this perfect kind of setup of logic and emotion with Bones, and I think you even see how out of balance he is, because I think he asks Bones like, what have I done? Like, this is like, there are some regrets and some doubts in it, and I think that. And that's just, for me, that just tells like he doesn't have those two. He makes these decisions. He second guesses himself. He isn't the Kirk that he normally is, and so that's why he's got to get Spock back. So I think that little line there. It's probably a throwaway line, but my head
No.
can's like, oh,
Hmm.
this is him just doubting himself because he doesn't have, his command decisions are doubted because he doesn't have this balance of the yin and yangs that we've kind of known in TOS. And I always love that line just because I think that you that's when you see Kirk like, okay, this guy is definitely broken and not right.
Yeah, that's a great point. I had never thought about it that specifically. That he's really flying by the seat of his pants because he doesn't have Spock, and that logic and emotional balance that we see so necessary in TOS that makes him who he is not there. He's only got part of it, and that leads to maybe some of these more emotional decisions that he makes to steal the Enterprise and go off on this. Like, he doesn't have that logical, half of his brain working. So he's taking some chances here. That's a really great point. Yep. Rob says he can't speak to this seeing the Enterprise get blown up in the 80s, but because he's about the same age as us. Seeing the Odyssey and the Defiant get destroyed in Deep Space Nine was definitely powerful. Remember his jaw dropping. So yeah, I mean the use of these ships going down, when used properly, can make a big impact. I can definitely agree with that. Anything else in the search for Spock that you definitely want to? I mean, I feel like we've done a topic on the search for Spock maybe a few years ago. This isn't the first time we've talked about this movie. So if you want like a more planned discussion about the search for Spock, you can go into our archive and probably about 100 episodes ago maybe find a discussion on the search for Spock that I'm thinking we probably did post rewatch at some point.
Yeah, I think so.
But I think we did a decent job of kind of tying it into some of the more recent Trek that we've seen that wasn't around back then.
Yeah, I think
talked about it before,
I think we don't really want to recycle topics, but I think that this one was interesting and I think perfectly planned because I think the Broken Circle it's so fresh in everyone's minds right now. I think it ties in really well.
Yeah, and I think you don't want to recycle topics, but these big tentpole things, the movies, the big important episodes, they merit coming back to every so often and years down the line, and new experiences and new Star Trek surrounding it, maybe impacting them differently, and reevaluating how they might sit. So I'm glad that we got to talk about Star Trek 3 a little bit today. It makes me want to go back and watch it again. I personally think it's really good. I know it like you said, it doesn't get the same degree of love that 2 and 4 and 6 do, and I know, but it definitely has its fans. I mean, there are people I've seen on Twitter who would pick it as maybe their favorite. I can think of one individual specifically who I think talks about it as his favorite. So it's got its fans, and I think generally speaking, it's very well liked. If you try to poll for some consensus, it's definitely a thumbs up Star Trek movie on the whole, for all these reasons that we touched on and many more. But it's cool to throw out some love because it maybe doesn't get the attention that some of the surrounding higher profile movies do. Let's pivot into to kind of wrap up in these last couple minutes here today. These last couple episodes of Strange New Worlds. Last time we were here, we talked about 1 and 2, the Broken Circle and Ad Astra per Aspera. Since we were here last, we got Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, time travel, La'an Kirk story, and Among the Lotus Eaters just this week. What do you think of the 2 episodes as a whole, and I guess maybe Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow first we'll touch on for a few minutes, and then we'll get into the newest.
I feel like there's got to be an acronym or something that's got to be
I know. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and
Tomorrow. Yeah. No, I really enjoyed it. There's been a lot of talk online about the City on the Edge connection and all that, but I think there's it's similar surface level, but I think there is some really, really deep, just like typical Star Trek. I think there's some really, really deep philosophical kind of themes are really explored here. You know, with Lon and her heritage, but I think there's always this like, you know, in psychology or in some of these, you know, classes or things, like people ask like, okay, these what if questions, like what if you would go back and, you know, kill Hitler? Well, how would that affect the timeline and things like that? And there's really, these really like philosophical, like really like morality, like, you know, questions and things to think about. And I think that's done here. I think that's more interesting to me a little bit. I really do love the lawn stuff, you know, with um, you know, how her, like, she doesn't, this Kirk doesn't know her name. That's another thing. This isn't our prime timeline Kirk,
Mm-mm.
people. Okay, just chill out. This is a different timeline Kirk.
Yeah.
But no, it's just, I don't know. It's just loaded with a lot of stuff, and I just find myself thinking about it even now. Like, you know, if I was in her shoes, what would I have done? You know, it's just, just it's, you know, it's that old adage, like thinking man Star Trek. That's a mark of true Star Trek. When I watch an episode and I'm thinking about it days later, I just think that it's definitely a solid episode for sure.
Yeah, I think the idea of, you know, the time travel, go back in time, do you kill Hitler, do you stop the Kennedy assassination? Those kinds of things are pretty, at this point, kind of cliche on the surface. But I think what makes this work is La'an's connection to it, like emotionally, that it's her ancestor. I think that's what gives it like the little extra bit of juice, and the fact that we know as much as we do about how that heritage and the lineage of the Noonien Singh stuff has affected La'an to this point. Like, you know, like deep down, what she would like to do is make that go away. That this has been a drag on her like nothing else, and that this is something she's had to live with her whole life, and is not a net positive in any way. And then you throw on the, you know, the need to preserve the timeline and all that stuff on top of it. It like that alone is interesting enough, and Star Trek's done that many times. But, you know, to have that specifically emotional entry point for the main character in the story, La'an, I think gives it the little extra juice that gives it that little more power than kind of a standard issue. You know, do we keep the timeline or not? I really, I mean, I've been grateful to see that I'm not alone on this, but I think Paul Wesley is freaking great as Kirk, especially here. I was a little more mixed with him in the finale of the first season of Quality of Mercy, which I love as a whole. But I was not in a position to argue with people who had struggles with that episode because maybe they just couldn't buy Paul Wesley as Kirk there. I totally bought him as Kirk here. I from the minute he turns around in the chair and sees La'an on the bridge, I was like, yeah, like he's not Chris Pine and he's not William Shatner, but he's Kirk. Like, he's playing Kirk. He's not playing Shatner playing Kirk. He's not playing Chris Pine playing Kirk, and he's not giving into the more exaggerated, you know, traits that have kind of become the pop culture identifying elements of who James Kirk is. But just his posture in the chair, his little twinkle in the eye, I think there's just enough of it, and I buy it. Like, I think he did a really, really nice job in a real. I mean, Ethan Peck's got a tough job. Paul Wesley's got a tougher job, I think, because it's so easy for us to want a portrayal of Kirk to kind of have the Shatnerism bravado, and I think it's layered on even more because Chris Pine delivered a lot of those things, and kind of echoed even some of that, you know, and kind of reinforced it, and that's what our brain is like trained to think that's what we want in Kirk. So it's really hard for anybody, I think, to take that job, but I think he really did a nice job here and brought a lot to the table. And I was on board with it. It kept me guessing. I didn't know where it was going, and, you know, for a long time I thought it was more echoing Star Trek IV, Picard season 2, kind of thing, going back in time, kind of being stuck. What do we have to do to fix it? and the way it kind of pivots at the end to kind of invert the city on the edge of forever. Kirk has to let Edith Keeler die to save the timeline. La'an has to let Khan live to save the timeline. Is a really interesting and cool way to kind of take a Star Trek concept and give it some fresh, like pay homage and acknowledge, tip your hat that, yeah, that we know a lot of you know that we're kind of thinking of City on the Edge, but we're not aping it. You know, it's a little bit of a different take. And you know, I think a lot of the oxygen has been taken by. You can find many videos of this on YouTube. People kind of batting this around, but the effect on the timeline and when did the eugenics wars happen, and Khan, you know, in Spacey they talk about it being in the 90s, and here it is in this day. Like there's a lot of that conversation out there.
Canon Police came out, yeah.
Yes, a lot of Canon Police conversations. I think this episode made a perfectly reasonable. You know, I buy it. I mean, at some point they had to do it, or they had to completely just stop referencing this stuff because we're in 2024, and you know, going back to Spacey, the word on the street was that these things happened in the early to mid 90s, and in Star Trek Voyager, the Janeway and crew come back to Earth in 96 in Future's End, and there's no eugenics wars or Khan, Noonien, and Singh in sight. So for years now, this has been kind of like a problem, like a little hanging for people who like to think about these things. And the way this episode kind of answers that with the dialogue about, you know, temporal wars have been like the temporal Cold War and Enterprise, all these tinkering with the timelines has been happening for so long that, you know, some things have been pushed and they're still happening, but they're happening a little later in the timeline. It's adjusting, and the flow of events is a little different than maybe it was, but they're still happening. Like, you know, whatever. It's you know, it's as good a reason as any to like to shelve that topic and make it work in my head. I know for some people it's not going to cut it, and it's problematic for some people, but I was good with it, and I really enjoyed the episode. I thought it was successful and a fun time. So, Jeff in the chat, Rob had to leave because he hasn't seen season 2 of Stranger Worlds yet. So good move, Rob. We hope you come back and you hear us talk about it later. Don't get spoiled. But Jeff says tomorrow is one he really likes. Haven't completely wrapped his head around it yet. Wants to watch it a few more times, but really like the performances and some cool time stuff to think about. Absolutely. I think we're kind of getting at the same thing there. Among the Lotus Eaters this week is a very different episode of Star Trek. I think it's the most
divisive so far, right?
Most divisive for sure, I think, on social media from what we've seen. You know, we have good friends who were not a fan at all of this episode. I've seen some people defend it and be fond of it. It's very TOS, which is what I like about it. I think there are... And just classic Star Trek. I think once they're like down on the planet, I think the conceit of like what's happening on Rigel 7 with the forgetting and the way it's impacting the society and the haves and the have-nots, and like that's all on the bones, like really good to me. I really enjoy a lot of that. Reed Birney is an actor who I've seen in a lot of movies. He's a Tony winner playing Luke. I think he's great in it. I think there are a lot of things to like, but I do think it's a little bit of a mixed bag, which I'll certainly get into. But what do you think of Among the Lotus Eaters?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a mixed bag. I think there's some stuff that I really enjoy and I'm really happy about.
Yeah,
you know, really, I think these 2 episodes in particular, I think there's are some a really deep dive into some characters that we don't really get a lot of screen time, and so that's what I really like about it. And then, you know, I won't say the big 3, but the 3 on the planet, and this specifically, yeah, I don't know, some of the emotional stuff just doesn't really land for me.
Yeah.
Which, you know, doesn't really tie with stuff on the planet, but that one character in particular on the planet. But no, I think you're right. I think you know, Bill hit the nail on the head here. It does feel very TOS. You know, like again, I keep talking about this, but this era of of Starfleet and Star Trek is like mistakes are made, civilizations are altered,
Yeah.
timelines are broken. Like this is a really messy period. And so I know that the canon police come out again and want to feel everything wants to be nicely wrapped up in a bow and perfect. But in this era, that is not the case. So I was definitely fine with that. I think there's some other aspects in this episode that I think drag it down for me.
Yeah, I think I told you right out of the gate after you watched it. I said, I think the framing device, the beginning, the bookending, Pike Battelle. I don't think the show has done enough to. Speaking subjectively for myself, I haven't felt invested in that at all, and like this kind of felt sudden to me, like that they were speaking so seriously about, like, or at least the way it was impacting Pike as like a relationship. It felt a little more casual to me up until this point. I think of episodes in the first season, lift us where your suffering cannot reach. He has kind of a fling with that alien woman on the planet. Like, I don't know that they've charted this particularly well, and I think the way that the forgetting and the sort of lesson learned on the planet through this experience and how it impacts his relationship with Battelle landed emotionally with me the way that the episode wanted it to. Like, I think of this and the premiere as kind of both kind of mixed bags for me, where there are things that really work and maybe things that work a little less well. I would actually give the edge to the premiere because I think I was more emotionally affected and invested in the Spock Chapel things when they were going for the emotional punches in that episode. I felt it. I felt the investment. I felt a little more moved by Spock's reaction to Chapel and the way those things played out. Where this with Pike, I didn't feel it. I felt the episode trying to tell me to, like, this is supposed to be impactful. This is supposed to tell you something about Pike, and he's supposed to be learning from this. But I just didn't feel it earned as much here. So that kind of puts a cap on it for me. I really like the Ortega stuff, but I also buy what a lot of people are saying, that they kind of sold this as the episode coming this season that was going to give Ortega some things to do and was going to tell us things about her, and it's going to be her big spotlight and showcase. And she certainly delivers. I think the actress is great. I think she's heroic. I think the way she overcomes her forgetting to save the ship and act instinctively and kind of force herself to do that. It's very Star Trek. I think it's classic Star Trek stuff. It reminds me of Kirk in This Side of Paradise, kind of willing himself to not go. His instincts take over there, hers do here. But it doesn't tell us anything about her. Like, yeah, I saw Heather, longstanding member of the Star Trek fandom on Twitter and on social media, say, this episode told us that she's the pilot of the ship, and yeah, like, we know she's really good at that, and that's her identity, and that's great. But I think what a lot of people want out of her is a little more meat on the bones, the way that a lot of the other characters have gotten some development and stuff. Mm-hmm.
Which, again, I saw that and I was like, the character's trying to be more like, she wants to be like
true
on the way mission.
Yeah,
it's just funny. But I back to the Pike relationship thing. You're talking to a guy who will ship any relationship, and I was like, I don't.
You're a sappy romantic. You are.
Yeah, they're kind of fluffing up something that's just, I feel like, just not there. And you're right. Like, I feel like, Pike has had runs with other, relationships before in the series, and it's not been. Yeah, I don't know.
I just I don't think they've invested in it. I don't think they've, to this point, leaned into it enough to make us buy what they're trying to sell here in this episode.
Yeah, and the Ortega stuff, I like that. For me, that was I guess one of my favorite parts of it, because I like that she, is wanting to go on away missions.
Yeah,
she
me too.
Wants to step away from the con. She wants to do these things, and I think I think in some shows I think I take that for granted, like how special and how interesting and how cool things these away missions and landing parties are, because literally Starfleet bases your command path of how well you do on these away missions. And so because you hear about you know Riker's past and how he made leaps and bounds in his career because of these away missions. And I think that we should add some more weight and some make these more special than just normal everyday beaming down. And so um, yeah, that's one aspect of the episode that I really liked.
Me too. I think that worked. I think the little stretch. I think when I think of this episode, the thing that's going to come to mind for me is her sitting in her quarters and like overcoming like that. That's the stretch in the episode where I felt like, okay, this is good. Like this is working really well. And to some extent, I think some of the stuff on the planet with Luke explaining the forgetting to the away team, I think just some of the way that information's presented and the crew is trying to deal with that, with the memory loss and all. Like to me, that felt very Star Trek. Like not even just TOS, but like I could, it for whatever like it actually had me thinking of stuff like the forgetting and like the slightly different use of words and like different lingo about things. Like it reminded me of Nemesis from Voyager with the aliens on that planet and Chakotay, communicating with these aliens who use very different words for things. I don't know why. It threw back to like these old Star Trek vibes, even of the 90s, with the way the information was delivered, the kinds of situations that they found themselves in, the science fiction conceit of it. It just felt very Berman era Trek to me.
Yeah, we just watched it. What's the Next Generation episode where Data's like hiding this memory from the crew and
Clues?
They forget Clues. Yeah.
Yeah, there's that, and then there's Conundrum where they get their memory wiped and the alien plant acting like the first officer's there, McDuff.
Right. Maybe that's the one that I'm thinking.
They're both. I mean, the Data hiding the memory from the crew is Clues. That's they encounter these aliens that don't want. They're xenophobic and isolationist. They don't want to be known.
What's the one where Worf tries to become the captain?
Conundrum. Yeah, he has the sash, so he's like, I must be the captain. Yeah. I'm decorated too. Yeah. That's Conundrum. So TNG's done, and that's why I think I kind of kept thinking of 90s Trek. That I think that the memory wipe, I think of Memorial and Voyager. Like this is something Star Trek's done a lot of times in different ways. But I do think this episode does some cool new things with it. That using a caste system where we forget so that we can work on the present stuff and not worry about the future or the past. We're just here to make the society go. Like really ugly, kind of nightmarish, horrifying situation to be in. But the way that Luke is kind of convinced himself to live it,
living in the moment,
and making the best of it. And has been conditioned to like see some positives in it, and is like, Lon's gonna die, but we'll forget about it, and that's good. Like it won't hurt us. We just have to let her die peacefully, and we'll forget about it tomorrow. And like it's horrifying and it's terrible. And it's certainly something that a lot of us can relate to because of things like Alzheimer's and dementia. People know people who deal with these kinds of memory issues in their families and friends. And so I think they were touching on some really cool things, but I don't think it totally cohesively comes together into what it is aiming to be. I think it would have, to me, I was kind of wanting it to be like, take it a little less seriously and just be a mission, like be an away mission, and don't try to tie it into this big, profound Pike relationship, insightful, like I don't believe that Pike would have taken the pendant with him on the mission. Like there's stuff like that I just don't totally buy it. I struggled with that part of the episode. But I think it's middle of the pack. I think there are people who, you sent me a tweet and I saw our friend Thad talking about, there are some folks online who were saying it's like the worst episode of Star Trek since 2017. I think that's bogus. I think all of the shows, including Strange New Worlds, have had episodes that I've liked less than this one. This is maybe towards the bottom for Strange New Worlds, but I can think of some Lower Decks episodes, you know what I'm talking about, that were way less good than this.
Yes.
And Yeah, but I think it's middle of the pack, and I think a lot of other people who are around, maybe in my age group, who were young and watching these '90s shows, the 26 episode seasons, talking about like, yeah, this is like most of the weeks were like this. Like, it was an episode of Star Trek. Didn't completely
Yeah,
work. It's
not
not all great.
every
Yeah,
single week we're gonna get a
yeah.
home run. It's just
Hmm.
yeah.
Like it was kind of run of the mill. There were some cool things about it. It's an episode. But I think Caleb said, who's not a fan of the episode, and I totally get it. When you're 10 episode season, not 26, like the pressure is greater, and there's not as much time to have the middle of the road. Like the hit rate feels like it's got to be, a little higher, and that's the product of going for 10 episodes. And yeah, it's the reality of TV today. But I think that's part of what also had me thinking back to the '90s. This just felt like a '90s episode of Star Trek. Like, yeah, it's all right. Like it's pretty good. But
It was there. Yeah.
it was there. It happened.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be like racking around in my brain for the next 6 months as like a classic. But it was all right. Okay. Any other thoughts on Strange New World so far? I think we'll talk more about
so.
the season as a
Yes.
whole in a few weeks. We'll kind of keep tabs as we're doing here and look at the episodes as they come. And maybe I think in 2 weeks we're going to do an episode on Strange New Worlds again. That'll be more than halfway through. By the time we're back again, we'll be 6 episodes in. It'll be right before the Lower Decks crossover, which is 7. So I think that'll be a good point to look at the season as a whole, look at the 6 episodes collectively. We'll talk about 5 and 6, obviously, in a little more detail, but look at where the season sits and how we're feeling about it in comparison to the first season, and maybe some of the other new track seasons as a whole when we're back in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. It's really nice to have new track. I feel like anytime we come back, it's really nice. So I'm excited to just keep talking about Strange New Worlds.
For sure, absolutely. It's really refreshing. I did a little bit. I watched a little bit of Picard season 3 last night, and I will sit here and say it's my favorite season of Star Trek in a long time, going back to 25 years, like going way back, right? But I just think it's absolutely phenomenal and so rewatchable. But what's so refreshing about this is that we can sit here and talk about Strange New Worlds and these little episodic adventures that are so like tomorrow, and Among the Lotus Eaters are so different from each other. They're both so different than 1 and 2 are. It's so comforting and classic to be able to have these kinds of conversations and not be looking at the episodes as more of like extensions of them of each other, and look at them as more like isolated animals. So really enjoying that. It makes it really cool to touch on here on the show every couple weeks.
Yep. Especially when my rewatch kind of slows down. It's nice to be able to
have that to lean on.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, the discussion doesn't have to stop here. We're always available on Twitter. We're there. We're logging our rewatches as best we can. You'll find my episode reviews and some polls going on there. We're also on the Discord server, the Trek Live Discord server. If you would like to join that, you can shoot me a DM on Twitter. I'd be happy to get you an invitation. It's a small, closely knit community of positive Star Trek fans who are, game to talk about anything, old, new, current, past, games, literature, books, all the stuff. Whatever you got going on in the world of Star Trek, it's a cool place to make connections and talk to people who are looking to meet and make new Star Trek friends. So if that's your game and you feel like that would help you and be beneficial, you can shoot me a DM on Twitter and I'll get you on board quickly. But aside from that, I think that'll do it for us this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Like I said, we'll talk some more Strange New Worlds and our rewatch recaps. Maybe you'll have an update for your ongoing project. Maybe, possibly,
Hopefully.
if your schedule allows. Your PC wrap that you introduced a few weeks back. So stay tuned. We'll be back with more Star Trek content in a couple weeks, and it's been a real pleasure, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Yep. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Yep. Take care, everybody.